The scent of lilies, heavy and cloying, choked the air around me, mingling with the metallic tang of champagne and the faint, unsettling aroma of fear, though in this gaudy hall only my fear was absent. My lips, painted a meticulous ruby red, curled imperceptibly at the corners. This was it. The farce. My wedding. Elise Vance, the girl everyone thought was merely a pretty, if somewhat aloof face, was about to be bound to a woman who saw her as little more than a necessary evil. They called me an heiress, but only a select few knew the true depth of the Vance fortune, or the steel forged in my veins by generations of ruthless acquisition. Beside me, my now wife Astrid, a formidable monolith of icy grace, stood stiffly, her gaze sweeping over the assembled guests with an air of practiced indifference. Her tailored white gown, pristine and sharp, mirrored her persona perfectly. She was a CEO, a titan in her own right, her empire built on code and ruthless efficiency. They called her the Ice Queen, a perfectly apt moniker for a woman who could freeze a room with a single glance, who saw emotions as liabilities, and who regarded me, her new spouse, with thinly veiled disdain. I'd watched her for months during the pre-nuptial arrangements, her sharp, calculating eyes dissecting every line of the contract, every clause designed to protect her assets, to ensure I, the trophy wife in her estimation, remained firmly in my ornamental box. She was a workaholic, a woman whose life revolved around the humming pulse of her servers and the brutal ballet of the stock market, and she looked down on me. Oh, how she looked down! I could feel the microscopic hairs on my neck prickle under her dismissive glances, the subtle curl of her lip when I offered a pedestrian comment, the way her shoulders stiffened if I dared to linger too close. She believed I was a mere accessory, a beautiful, vacant vessel into which her family could pour their expectations of a respectable partnership. She believed I was frivolous, dependent, a drain on her meticulously constructed world. I was willing to roll with the punches until one of the old farts that set up this marriage finally died and we could leave each other however it seemed that she wanted to swing harder at me. Right as we got married, her grandpa croaked. So now, we're here. Poor, sweet, deluded Astrid. She didn't know I was already at the very top of the world, a silent, invisible monarch, observing her bustling anthill from my unassailable peak. Her meticulously drafted marriage contract, a document as cold and precise as she was, lay innocently on the polished mahogany table in our new, shared study. I sometimes traced the elegant script with a nail, the ink absorbing the residual chill from my skin. Clause 3.1. The party of the first part, Elise Vance, shall not, under any circumstances, spend the personal funds of the party of the second part, Astrid Thorne, without explicit written consent. Clause 3.2. The party of the first part shall refrain from any conduct or activity that may bring disrepute or negative publicity to the party of the second part or her business interests. Clause 3.3. The party of the first part shall at all times defer to the decisions and requests of the party of the second part concerning household management, social engagements, and public appearances. Meaningless, every single word, a child scribbled rules on a scrap of paper, to be ignored or, better yet, set alight. The ink was barely dry on the official marriage certificate, the champagne still fizzing in the oversized flutes held by well-wishers, when I decided to disabuse her of her quaint notions. Later that evening, the grandeur of the reception having dwindled to a polite hum, Astrid and I found ourselves in the cavernous, impersonal living room of the penthouse she'd purchased for our shared life. The city lights glittered cold and distant beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, mimicking the atmosphere within. She was already shedding her polite facade, pulling the pins from her intricate chignon, her movements sharp and efficient. A silk robe, battleship grey, replaced her bridal gown with almost surgical precision. "Well, that's over," she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth, any sentiment. She glanced at me, still in my shimmering gown, a single diamond earring catching the light like a frozen tear. "I trust you found the arrangement suitable?" I took a slow sip of the expensive scotch I'd poured for myself, the amber liquid burning a gentle path down my throat. Exquisite, Astrid, every detail, though I confess the lilies were a touch funereal. Her brows, dark and perfectly sculpted, drew together. Lilies are traditional. They signify purity. I hummed, a low, languid sound. Indeed, a curious choice for a union such as ours. Wouldn't you agree? I met her gaze, letting my own eyes, usually veiled by a calculated softness, harden just a fraction. A flicker, barely perceptible, passed through hers. Curiosity, perhaps, or a nascent irritation. She ignored the barb, turning to her personal assistant, who materialized from the shadows holding a sleek tablet. "Remind me to review the Q3 earnings forecast first thing tomorrow, and schedule that call with the Tokyo team for 4 a.m. PST. I want to optimize for their market opening." She spoke as if I weren't even in the room, her voice already slipping into the crisp, authoritarian tone of the boardroom. "Astrid," I said, my voice cutting through her directives, soft yet undeniably present. She paused, her head tilting slightly like a predator assessing a minor distraction. "Yes, Elise?" Her tone was laced with an impatience that she barely bothered to mask. "Our agreement," I began, setting my glass down on a glass-topped table with a delicate clink. The contract, its pages still smelling faintly of crisp paper and her lawyer's cologne, lay between us. "The one you so painstakingly crafted." She gestured dismissively. "A formality, necessary protections given the circumstances." Her eyes flickered over my gown, an unspoken implication of my circumstances, my family name, my comfortable but seemingly unambitious existence. "Indeed," I murmured, leaning forward just enough to ensure her full attention. My gaze locked onto hers, unwavering. "It states I am not to spend your money, that I am not to make you look bad, that I am to obey your directives." A small, thin smile touched her lips. "Precisely. I'm pleased you remember the terms, Elise. It will make this arrangement considerably smoother." My smile, however, was colder. "Oh, Astrid, you naive, arrogant creature, those terms mean absolutely nothing to me." My voice dropped to a silken whisper, barely audible above the distant city hum, yet it vibrated with an electric charge. "Let me be abundantly clear. If you ever upset me, if you ever presume to dictate my actions or dismiss my worth, I will show you the true meaning of power and fear. What you have built," I waved a hand vaguely around the opulent room, "what you think you control, it is but a sandcastle before my tide." Her composure, so perfectly maintained, finally cracked. Her eyes widened, a flash of genuine surprise momentarily displacing the cold self-assurance. Then, a slow, incredulous laugh bubbled up from her chest, low and husky. "Elise, my dear, you've had too much champagne, or perhaps you're under the impression this is some kind of gothic romance where the docile wife suddenly discovers a hidden demonic core. You misunderstand the reality of our situation. You have nothing, I have everything. You are decorative." Her words, sharp and dismissive, sliced through the air like icicles. Decorative, me, Elise Vance. A quiet storm gathered behind my eyes. She didn't believe me, not one single syllable. The true meaning of power and fear, she had scoffed. Very well, let the lesson begin. The scent of her expensive perfume, a sharp, citrusy blend, suddenly seemed cloying, sickly sweet. I rose fluidly, my silk gown rustling softly, and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, a glittering tapestry of lives and ambitions, all so fragile. "Good night, Astrid," I said in my back to her. My voice was calm, almost serene, belying the absolute unyielding resolve that had settled in my core. "Say goodbye to your brother while you're at it," I whispered to myself. The next morning, the chilled precision of Astrid's routine was a familiar, if irritating, rhythm in the penthouse. She was already gone by the time my personal assistant, a woman named Anya, whose loyalty was purchased with generous compensation and genuine respect, had discreetly laid out my preferred morning tea. The silence of the vast apartment was broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the soft, rhythmic hum of the building's ventilation system. I allowed myself the luxury of a leisurely start, savouring the delicate blend of Earl Grey, the warmth of the porcelain cup, a pleasant counterpoint to the chill that always seemed to reside within me. I was reviewing the latest market trends, not through dry reports, but through interactive neural feeds that streamed directly into my augmented reality contacts when the first tremor hit. Not for me, of course, but for Astrid. My phone, a bespoke device shielded with layers of encryption only I could bypass, vibrated with a discreet notification. Anya had been busy. Target, Nathaniel Thorne, Company, Thorne Innovations. Status, vulnerable, initiating phase 1. Nathaniel Thorne was Astrid's younger brother, a charming, affable man with a penchant for flashy cars, and even flashier investment schemes. He ran a tech startup, Thorne Innovations, a promising but always slightly over-leveraged venture into sustainable urban farming technology. Astrid had, years ago, sunk a considerable sum into it, a familial obligation more than a sound investment, but Nathan's current personal loans were tied to the company's valuation. Astrid thought she had him on a tight leash. I, however, saw the threads of that leash, not as restraints, but as delightful tripwires. I pictured Astrid in her pristine office, bathed in the cool light of her monitors, utterly oblivious. She likely assumed I was enjoying a late breakfast, perhaps contemplating which boutique to raid. The irony was delicious. A few hours later, the second notification arrived. Thorne Innovations. Status, critical, irrecoverable financial insolvency triggered. Legal proceedings imminent. Phase 1 complete. The beauty of it was the untraceability. Anya's team, a shadow network of digital phantoms and financial architects, had simply pulled strings already there. A whisper to a key creditor about a sudden, looming product recall that didn't exist, a carefully timed dip in a related stock, a highly localized DDoS attack on their sales portal during a crucial launch window, all orchestrated to appear as a series of unfortunate, unconnected events. Nathaniel's house of cards, already swaying, simply toppled. My phone rang then, a shrill, unwelcome intrusion. Astrid. She never called. She texted or sent terse emails. This was different. Her voice, when I answered, was clipped tight, stretched thin by a nascent panic. "Elise, have you heard from Nathaniel?" Her voice was colder than usual, edged with something I hadn't heard before. Desperation. "Nathaniel?" I feigned mild surprise, my own voice a picture of calm detachment. "No, Astrid. Is everything all right? I was just enjoying a quiet afternoon with a fascinating biography." A sharp exhale. "No, everything is not all right. His company, Thorne Innovations, so it's gone under, bankrupt, overnight. Creditors are swarming. It's a disaster." The words came out in a torrent, revealing the cracks in her formidable composure. The ice cream was melting, just a fraction. "Oh dear," I murmured, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. How dreadfully unfortunate for him. I always thought his venture into hydroponic algae farms was a touch ambitious. Ambitious? Her voice rose slightly. Elise, this isn't some idle gossip. This affects my family, my investment. Ah, there it was, not truly concerned for her brother, but for her own financial imprint. Surely, Astrid, a woman of your prodigious wealth and influence can absorb a small loss and bail out her struggling sibling. Or is the Ice Queen not so omnipotent after all? My tone was light, mocking, a delicate barb designed to pierce her carefully constructed armor. A beat of stunned silence, then a low, dangerous growl. You don't understand, Elise. This isn't just a loss. This is an attack. It's too sudden, too perfectly timed. Someone targeted him. I hummed, feigning thought. What an interesting conspiracy theory. Perhaps it was a swift, brutal correction of the market, Astrid. A faulty product, wouldn't you say? I used her own terminology, letting the words hang in the air, a silent challenge. There was a sharp click as she ended the call. Her anger was a palpable wave, even through the fiber optics. She chose not to believe me. Not yet. She would rationalize it, seek external enemies, blame the market, perhaps even herself for not being vigilant enough. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, and that was precisely what I wanted. The following week passed in a haze of feigned domesticity and real financial mayhem. Astrid spent every waking hour on crisis management, her energy focused on damage control for Nathaniel's collapsed company. She moved through the penthouse like a storm front, her footsteps echoing sharply on the marble floors, her calls growing more agitated with each passing day. The sharp scent of her stress, a metallic undercurrent to her expensive perfume, was a subtle but constant presence. She ignored me for the most part, save for the occasional tight-lipped good morning, or a curt demand regarding a social function she felt obligated to attend. Her disdain for my apparent idleness was a thick, almost visual thing. I, in turn, moved with a leisurely grace, observing her frantic efforts from the periphery. I practiced my yoga in the sun-drenched conservatory, read obscure philosophy texts, and allowed Anya to arrange my latest art acquisitions. I played the part perfectly. The idle, decorative wife. All the while, my network hummed beneath the surface, a vast, complex organism awaiting my command. A few days later, we were at a particularly tedious charity gala, an event Astrid considered a necessary evil for maintaining her corporate image. The air was thick with the scent of lilies again, this time mingled with designer perfumes and the clink of expensive jewelry. Astrid, dressed in a sleek black gown that seemed to absorb all light, was cornered by a group of equally powerful, equally humorless men, all discussing the latest market fluctuations. Her jaw was tight, her eyes scanning the room, perhaps looking for an escape, perhaps for another opportunity. I, conversely, was enjoying an unnecessarily rich chocolate torte, pretending to listen to a minor European diplomat drone on about his country's surprisingly robust wine industry. My attention, however, was entirely on Astrid. She locked eyes with me across the crowded ballroom, her expression cold, accusatory. She had managed to salvage some of Nathaniel's personal assets, but his company was irrevocably lost. The humiliation, the professional setback, gnawed at her. She blamed me, I knew, for not being the comforting, supportive wife she felt she deserved, for my apparent nonchalance in the face of her family's misfortune. As she extricated herself from her conversation, her path led her directly to me. Her presence, always formidable, felt particularly heavy tonight, radiating an almost palpable anger. "Elise," she began, her voice low, a silken whip, "I have been thinking about your bizarre pronouncements the other night, about power and fear." I dabbed a napkin elegantly to my lips, savouring the lingering taste of cocoa and dark cherry. "And what have you concluded, Astrid?" Her eyes, usually so flat and unwavering, glinted with something akin to contempt. "I've concluded that you are a spoiled child playing at being dangerous. A pathetic attempt to exert control in a world you don't understand, simply because your family name allows you a seat at the table. You are utterly useless in any practical sense. You bring nothing to this marriage but a pretty face and a colossal waste of my time." She ended with a dismissive flick of her wrist, as though swatting away an annoying insect. Her voice, while quiet, carried a cutting edge that left no room for misinterpretation. A vein in my temple throbbed, a tiny flutter against my skin. Useless, colossal waste of her time. The words, meant to wound, merely ignited a colder, more precise sort of fury within me. My smile remained fixed and unyielding, but my eyes grew opaque, turning the color of storm clouds at midnight. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it somehow sliced through the din of the gala. "Then perhaps I should offer you a more practical demonstration of my utility." She rolled her eyes, turning away, obviously deeming the conversation over. "Don't bother, Elise. I have actual work to do." Her dismissal was the final spark. My fingers, still holding the delicate napkin, clenched, crushing the soft linen into a tight ball. Anya's presence, discreet as ever, suddenly felt more potent. The woman was always within arm's reach, a shadow guardian awaiting instructions. I barely needed to shift my gaze. A subtle twitch of my left eyebrow, a minuscule adjustment of my posture was enough. Anya, sensing the shift in my aura, nodded almost imperceptibly, her expression unreadable. Within minutes, my internal comm system, a discreet device woven into a diamond bracelet, vibrated gently. Phase 2 initiated. Target, Thorncorp stock. Predicted impact, limit down within 45 minutes. Thorncorp was Astrid's flagship company, the core of her empire, her lifeblood. Watching her, I saw her phone buzz. She glanced at it, her expression still aloof, then frowned. Another buzz, more insistent. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through something, a puzzled expression creasing her forehead. A ripple of murmuring began to spread through the room, whispers punctuated by the sudden urgent ringtones of other phones. "What is this?" Astrid muttered, her voice tinged with annoyance. She was scrolling furiously, her fingers flying across the screen. Her eyes widened, losing their coldness, replaced by a dawning horror. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. "Astrid, what's happening?" someone nearby asked, a nervous tremor in their voice. "Thorncorp, the stock," she stammered, her voice thin. "It just dropped. Limit down within 20 minutes. It's a technical glitch, a market anomaly. It has to be." She looked up, her gaze frantic, searching for an explanation, for an enemy, for anything but the steel that had just entered my eyes. The financial news tickers, usually so slow to update, were now flashing red, screaming headlines into the digital ether. "Thorpe Corp plummets. Nasdaq shocker. Millions wiped out in minutes." "A fluke," I murmured, stepping closer to her, my voice gentle, almost commiserating. A tiny, cruel smile touched my lips. "Are you quite certain, Astrid? Or is this another, more visible manifestation of my uselessness?" She stared at me, her eyes dilated, a raw, naked fear blooming in their depths. The color had drained from her face, leaving her porcelain skin stark white against the dark backdrop of her gown. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. She still didn't truly believe it was me. Not quite. She couldn't fathom the truth. The layers of her own arrogance, her own estimation of my worthlessness, shielded her from the impossible reality. It was a statistical anomaly, a coordinated attack by competitors, a black swan event. Anything but the quiet woman standing before her, whose presence was now radiating an almost palpable predatory calm. She still deluded herself into thinking I was merely a faulty product of my privileged upbringing, not the destructive force she was only just beginning to truly glimpse. The scent of fear, this time her own, was finally becoming distinct and sharp in the overwhelming sweetness of the lilies. The fallout from Thorn Corp's stock dive was cataclysmic. The market recoiled, analysts scrambled, and whispers about coordinated attacks and corporate espionage circulated like a virulent plague. Astrid, however, remained resolute, publicly framing it as a temporary market correction and vowing swift retaliation against any unscrupulous challengers. Privately, I knew she was a caged animal, pacing her office, barking orders, her features growing sharper, gaunter with each passing day. Her perfume, once a subtle accompaniment, now seemed to carry an acrid note of desperation. Our home, the penthouse, became a battleground of icy silence. Astrid would pass me in the halls, her eyes narrowed slits, her expression a mask of barely contained hostility, fury, and suspicion. She occasionally tried to assert her authority, demanding I attend a business dinner or asking pointedly about my day, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive condescension. Each time I met her gaze with an unshakable calm, a subtle tilt of my head and a faint smile that only fueled her simmering rage. My silence, my serene indifference, became its own form of torture. The next day, a scandal would break out and her company would lose a few more $100 million. Then came the family dinner, an annual affair hosted by Astrid's parents at their sprawling estate in the Hamptons. The air always felt heavy in that house, thick with the scent of old money, polish, and unspoken grievances. This year, the tension was particularly brittle, stretched taut by the recent Thorn Corp debacle and Nathaniel's lingering financial woes. I arrived with Astrid, her hand clamped around my arm with proprietary force, as if to remind me of my place. Her family, a collection of equally stiff-backed, judgmental aristocrats, greeted me with polite, dismissive nods. They saw me as the pretty ornament, the convenient wife, another piece of the Thorn Empire's glittering facade. Among them was Alistair Thorn, Astrid's uncle, a man who, beneath his veneer of old-world charm, was a truly odious character. He was a long-time board member at Thorn Corp, known for his subtle machinations and a particularly unpleasant habit of undermining anyone who posed even a remote threat to his influence. I knew, through Anya's exhaustive background checks, that Alistair had been subtly siphoning funds from dormant Thorn Corp subsidiaries for years, a scheme he thought utterly untraceable. He also harboured a deep-seated resentment toward Astrid for her swift ascent to CEO, viewing her as an upstart, and he saw me as a prime target for his petty cruelty. The dinner itself was a symphony of forced pleasantries and thinly veiled jabs. The crystal clinked, the silverware scraped, and the soft strains of a string quartet in the adjacent room provided a melancholic soundtrack. Astrid, still reeling from the stock crash, was unusually quiet, her eyes darting nervously around the table, aware of the unspoken criticisms hanging in the opulent air. Alistair, several glasses of Bordeaux in, decided to strike. He leaned forward, his florid face creased with a condescending smile. "So, Elise, my dear," he began, his voice booming slightly, cutting through the polite chatter. "Still pursuing your rather artistic hobbies, I presume? Or have you found a way to contribute something tangible to the Thorn family's legacy? Perhaps an endorsement deal for a particularly exquisite brand of teacups?" His laughter was a dry, rattling sound, joined by a few nervous titters from his cronies at the table. Astrid stiffened beside me, clearly embarrassed but unwilling or unable in her current state to come to my defense. She merely cast me a look that said, "Handle this politely." I met Alistair's gaze, my own eyes as still and deep as a frozen lake. My contributions, Uncle Alistair, are perhaps not as immediately quantifiable as your own ingenious financial maneuvers, but I assure you they are impactful. My voice was soft, laced with a double meaning that only I, and perhaps Astrid, if she were truly listening, could discern. He scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Impactful? My dear, you epitomize uselessness. A pretty face, nothing more. A burden on us all, especially poor Astrid, who has enough on her plate trying to salvage the mess someone made of Thorncorp. Honestly, with your refined palate and your aversion to anything remotely resembling work, you're merely a faulty product of your privileged upbringing. Good for nothing but breeding and appearances. The last words hung in the air, echoing the very insult Astrid had hurled at me just days before. Faulty products! The phrase resonated in the hollow space behind my ribs. The delicate china plate in front of me, with its hand-painted gold rim, suddenly seemed fragile, an illusion of refinement. The atmosphere around the table grew suddenly cold, a few uneasy coughs punctuating the silence. Astrid finally spoke, her voice strained. Alistair, that's quite enough. Elise is my wife. Her defense was half-hearted, more about maintaining decorum than genuine protection. I, however, remained perfectly still. My face was a mask of serene indifference, but a cold fire had ignited in my veins. My gaze, flint-sharp, bore into Alistair. His co-conspirators, 2 other board members who had benefited from his illicit schemes and laughed at his cruel jokes, nodded along, their bloated faces smug. They too had dismissed me, ridiculed me in whispers, believing me a weakness for Astrid. They too were faulty products. My hand, resting lightly on my lap, opened and closed with a silent resolve. Anya would already be anticipating my move. The subtle vibration of my bracelet confirmed it. A nod, a flicker of intention was all my network required. No need for words. Indeed, Astrid, I said, my voice cutting through the tension with surprising sweetness. I am your wife. And, Uncle Alistair, you will find that even the most useless products can still carry a significant payload. My smile widened, a chilling, genuine curve of my lips. Alistair, oblivious in his self-satisfaction, merely let out another braying laugh. Payload? My dear, you amuse me. You really do. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of escalating tension for everyone else. For me, it was a slow, delicious countdown. I could almost hear the distant ticking of a clock. That night, the news broke. Not through a formal announcement, but through a frantic flurry of early morning alerts that shattered the Hamptons' usual tranquility. Fatal car accident claims lives of prominent Thorncorp board members. Untraceable vehicle causes multi-car pile-up on coastal highway. Alistair Thorne among the deceased. The reports were terse, deliberately vague. A sudden swerve, inexplicable loss of control, a fiery collision involving Alistair, 2 of his closest board allies, and a driver described only as unidentified. No trace of the offending vehicle. No survivors from Alistair's car. Total annihilation. Oh no, I said with feigned concern. How tragic, truly. I watched Astrid as she received the news. Her personal assistant, a pale, trembling thing, stood before her, relaying the horrifying details in hushed tones. Astrid's face, usually so composed, crumpled. Not with grief, I observed clinically, but with sheer, unadulterated terror. Her family, her assets, were unraveling before her eyes, and she was powerless to stop it. She finally looked at me, her eyes bloodshot and wide, utterly stripped of their icy facade. She had been on the phone all night, trying to make sense of the market's violent reaction, trying to understand how such a fluke could happen again, so soon after the stock crash. The untraceable fatal car accident was the final shard, piercing through her denial, through her arrogance, through her self-deception. She remembered my words. If she upsets me, I'll show her the true meaning of power and fear. She remembered my quiet threat at the gala. She remembered my words to Alistair at the dinner table. You, she whispered, her voice barely a breath, her lips trembling. She pointed a shaking finger at me, accusing yet horrified. You did this. The stock, Nathaniel, Alistair and those others. I met her gaze, my own eyes devoid of warmth, shimmering with an unyielding certainty. The flickering city lights beyond the penthouse windows reflected in their depths, making them appear like polished obsidian. They called me useless, Astrid, a faulty product. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet it carried the weight of absolute unassailable power. And you, my dear wife, you agreed with them. You looked down on me. You believed your petty contract could bind me. She recoiled, stumbling back slightly, knocking a priceless vase from its pedestal. It shattered, the sharp sound echoing through the vast, silent room. The small shards of porcelain glinted on the polished floor like fallen stars. Her perfect coiffure was dishevelled, her expensive silk pajamas crumpled. The Ice Queen was not just melting, she was dissolving. There's nothing but steel in my eyes, Astrid, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet intensity that filled the room. And you, my magnificent, work-obsessed Ice Queen, with all your carefully constructed empire and your meticulously negotiated contracts, you are nothing but a faulty product of your own making. And I, Elise Vance, have no use for faulty products. Her breath hitched, a ragged, ugly sound. She stared at me, truly saw me for the first time. Not the decorative wife, not the idle heiress, but the silent, unseen architect of her unravelling. The cold, calculating force that had dismantled her world with a mere flick of a wrist. Her eyes, once so sharp and dismissive, were now wide with a terror that clawed at the edges of madness. The scent of fear was now overpowering, a sharp, metallic pungency that filled my senses. She was broken, and I, Elise Vance, was finally free. The game was over. I had won. Epilogue. The year that followed my declaration was a masterclass in slow, exquisite destruction. A delicate symphony played out over 4 acts, each movement designed to strip Astrid of an artery, a limb, a vital organ, until all that remained was a hollowed-out husk. I watched, unseen, unheard, yet profoundly present in every tremor of her world. The bitter scent of her unravelling, once faint and distant, grew stronger with each passing quarter, a potent perfume of despair. The first quarter was dedicated to Thorn Corp. Astrid, in her desperate disbelief, had dismissed the stock plummet as a fluke, an anomaly. But a fluke doesn't continue for weeks, doesn't see market confidence erode like rust on untreated steel. My private subsidiaries, a network of agile, silent predators, moved with surgical precision. They weren't interested in a hostile takeover, not entirely. Their goal was dismantling. First, they poached. Key engineers, brilliant minds Astrid had cultivated, received offers they couldn't refuse, not just financial, but intellectual freedom, resources beyond Thorn Corp's now straining capabilities. The quiet hum of the servers, the very lifeblood of Astrid's empire, began to stutter as crucial personnel slipped away like mist before the dawn. Then came the strategic acquisitions. Patents, licenses, even obscure but vital software components that Thorn Corp relied upon were quietly bought up by shell companies I controlled. Imagine a finely tuned machine, Astrid's machine, suddenly missing its core gears and cogs, replaced by air. I read the financial reports Anya delivered daily with a serene smile. Each line item was a brushstroke on my canvas of ruin. Thorn Corp's quarterly earnings plunged, hitting historic lows. The news articles, once filled with glowing profiles of Astrid Thorn, the Ice Queen of Tech, now spoke of mismanagement, instability, and a leadership in crisis. The pride in her voice, the crisp authority in her commands that used to echo through our sterile penthouse, had given way to a strained urgency, then a raw, frayed edge. I could almost hear the frantic beating of her heart from my quiet wing of the apartment, the thrum of desperation vibrating through the very walls. The scent of her expensive espresso, often brewed to fuel her late nights, was now overshadowed by the faint, unpleasant odor of fear and sleeplessness. Then came the second quarter of our marriage, and with it, the great exodus. Thorn Corp's partners, firms that had worked with Astrid's company for generations, began to flee. It wasn't overt. There were no grand announcements, no dramatic breaking of ties. It was far more insidious. Contract renewals were stalled. Meetings were perpetually rescheduled, then quietly cancelled. Emails went unanswered. The subtle chill of ostracization settled upon Astrid's company, and by extension, upon her. My network spread its silken threads, whispering into boardrooms, planting seeds of doubt, offering tempting alternatives. Thorn Corp's future is uncertain, they'd murmur. Their supply chain is compromised, their leadership unstable. Perhaps a partnership with our emerging ventures might offer more security, more innovation. The partners, once stalwart pillars of her enterprise, crumbled under the pressure of self-preservation. They simply stopped speaking to Astrid. Her calls went to voicemail. Her invitations were met with polite, vague excuses. The silence grew deafening, enveloping her like a shroud. I saw the change in her. Her posture, once ramrod straight, began to curve inwards, as if she were trying to shield herself from an invisible barrage. The sharp angles of her face softened, growing gaunt, etched with lines of worry and exhaustion. She still dressed impeccably, but the clothes no longer seemed to fit her frame, hanging a little too loosely on her shoulders. Her signature citrus perfume no longer cut through the air with its usual confidence, but rather seemed to cling to her, a mournful echo of her former self. The bitter taste of defeat was now palpable, even across a room. The third quarter struck closer to home, severing the few remaining threads of Astrid's support system. Her mother, a formidable matriarch in her own right, had always harbored a low opinion of me, seeing me as a convenient but ultimately insignificant extension of the Vance name. She had made no secret of her disdain, particularly after the twin blows to Thorn Corp and Nathaniel's venture. Lounging in the opulent, empty drawing rooms of her sprawling estate, she'd filled her days with acidic pronouncements about my supposed culpability, her voice dripping with venom across society pages and private dinners. Anya's network was particularly adept at leveraging existing vulnerabilities. A discreet leak here, a carefully timed exposé there, revealing not so flattering details about the Thorn family's historical business practices, coupled with immense financial pressure on their dwindling personal investments. The stress, the public humiliation, the sudden inexplicable decay of her carefully constructed world weighed heavily. Her mother was hospitalized with what was described as a severe stress-induced cardiac incident. She survived, but the fight had gone out of her. Her once sharp words were replaced by a fragile silence. Her eyes, when lucid, would tremble wildly whenever she saw me. And Nathaniel. Poor, feckless Nathaniel. Already swimming in debt and shame, a carefully orchestrated series of new overwhelming legal threats, baseless, of course, but presented with such terrifying conviction, convinced him that disappearing was his only option. He fled to a country with no extradition treaty, sending no word, no warning. He simply evaporated, severing his last fragile link to Astrid. My vengeance was thorough. I wanted Astrid utterly alone, stripped bare of family, fortune, and pride. I wanted the cold, isolating embrace of absolute power to be the only thing she felt. The air in the penthouse had grown so heavy with her silent despair that I sometimes felt it pressing down on my own chest. A faint, almost sickly, sweet aroma of oversteeped tea, her comfort in those dark days, clung to her like a shroud. The final quarter brought Astrid to her knees. Her family's ancestral home, the Thorne residence, a sprawling, elegant mansion that had housed generations of Thornes, became my final target. It was a poetic touch. For generations, the Thorne family had built their legacy, their pride, on the foundations of that home. It was where Astrid had been raised, where her family's power seemed immutable. Through a labyrinthine series of financial maneuvers, leveraging Thornecorp's accumulated debts, her family's dwindling assets, and a few carefully positioned distressed asset purchases by my own holding companies, the Thorne residence ended up on the market. Only one buyer emerged. Me. The irony was exquisite. Her ancestral home foreclosed, stripped from her, and absorbed into the ever-expanding portfolio of Elise Vance, the useless heiress. I'd given her a full year, 365 days, to come to terms with the magnitude of her colossal error. 365 days for the flukes, the unfortunate coincidences, the market corrections to coalesce into the undeniable truth. And now, the foreclosed Thorne residence, a shell of its former grandeur, stood ready for our final, inevitable confrontation. It was a cold, miserable day, the kind of day where the sky bled grey and the rain fell in a relentless, unforgiving sheet, turning the manicured lawns into a slick, dark green sheen. It was a tragic and sad kind of day, really, but not for me. I stood under the wide archway of the residence's main entrance, sheltered from the downpour by a deep, ornate stone overhang. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and the lingering, ghostly aroma of old brass and polished wood from the abandoned house. A sleek black car, discreet but undeniably luxurious, pulled up the winding drive. The driver, Anya, remained stoic behind the wheel. The figure emerging from the car was almost unrecognizable. Astrid. She was utterly, horribly changed. Her once impeccable hair, usually sculpted into a severe chignon, hung in lank, wet strands around her face, plastered to her temples. Her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were sunken and bloodshot, ringed with dark shadows. Her expensive clothes, a tailored suit that had probably once looked sharp and powerful, now hung loosely on her emaciated frame, soaked and clinging. She wasn't just gaunt. She was almost skeletal, the sharp angles of her cheekbones and jaw brutally prominent. The air around her smelled distinctly of stale coffee and desperation. She moved with a jerky, almost frantic energy, her polished leather shoes squelching softly in the sodden gravel of the courtyard. "What a lovely day, Astrid," I said calmly, making no move as I watched her. "Elise." Her voice was hoarse, raw, stripped of all its former power and arrogance. It was the desperate cry of a cornered animal. She stumbled towards me, her face contorted, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. "Make it stop. Please, for God's sake, Elise, make it stop." Her hands, thin and trembling, clenched and unclenched at her sides. She watched in horror as her assistant, former now, moved past her. To me. I remained motionless under the archway, a stark contrast to her frantic despair. Anya held a large black umbrella over me, its canopy a silent shield against the elements. I wore a tailored black coat, perfectly dry, my hair immaculately styled. My expression was serene, detached, almost bored. "Make what stop, Astrid?" I asked, my voice soft, melodious, utterly devoid of sympathy. The rain created a shimmering curtain between us, blurring the edges of her agony. "All of it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "My company, my family, my home. You took everything. You ruined me." She stopped a few feet from me, panting, the rain plastering her hair to her face. Her chest heaved, and I could see the glint of something metallic in her hand. A knife, a small, wicked blade, probably from the kitchen of what was once her home. "You said you'd show me power and fear," she hissed, her voice laced with an unimaginable blend of grief and fury. "I'll show you fear. I'll kill you. I swear to God I will gut you right here, you soulless bitch." She took a step, raising the knife, her eyes wide and mad. Before she could take another, a small crimson dot of light appeared on her chest, just above her heart. It pulsed, a silent, menacing beacon against the dark, wet fabric of her soaked suit. Astrid froze, the knife still clutched in her hand, her eyes darting down to the tiny red orb, then back up to me. The madness in her gaze flickered, replaced by pure, paralyzing terror. She knew. She understood the implication. "Careful, Astrid," I murmured, my voice perfectly calm, a gentle hum against the drumming rain. Such impetuousness. It almost makes me regret all the effort. I watched her, not with anger, but with a detached fascination, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. We could have had a peaceful year. You could have listened to my warning at the start. You could have even done a slight background check on who you were marrying, darling. You might have found that the useless heiress was far more resourceful than you imagined. Her lips trembled, forming silent pleas. The red dot remained, unwavering. I stepped forward, just a single, elegant pace, bringing me closer to the edge of the overhang, feeling the faint spray of rain on my face. "You see, Astrid, what you and your family perceived as a strategic alliance, a merger of old money and new empire. For my family, it was merely a long-term contract. A promise made between my grandmother and your grandfather generations ago. A binding marriage pact, designed to merge two legacies." I saw the flicker of comprehension in her eyes, the dawning horror as she connected the dots of history. Her grandfather, a man she barely remembered, a man whose death had seemed so distant and irrelevant. "The terms were specific," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet, almost poetic cadence. "A year of observation, a year for the union to solidify. If, after that year, the partners were found to be incompatible, or one party was deemed unfit to uphold their end of the bargain, the pact would dissolve and the weaker lineage would be absorbed." A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "Your grandfather, a rather sentimental man, insisted on a clause that if his granddaughter, his darling Astrid, proved truly exceptional, the pact could become eternal. But if she proved to be merely a faulty product, well, then the larger, stronger house would simply reclaim what it was owed." I tilted my head, studying her utterly broken form. "Your grandfather passed away at the start of the year, Astrid. That condition, the one that kept you safe, is now gone. And your year of observation, darling, it's up." The red dot vanished from her chest. The blade clattered on the pavement. The rain continued its relentless fall. I turned slowly, deliberately, my black coat swirling around me, and walked back under the archway. "Goodbye, Astrid." I left her there, utterly alone in the pouring rain, in the courtyard of what was once her home, now mine. Her last, desperate hope shattered, her world utterly dismantled, reduced to nothingness not by malice, but by a meticulously executed contract and her own profound underestimation. The scent of rain-soaked earth and her bitter tears was the perfect ending to a year of quiet, satisfying fury. Anya opened the car door. I stepped in, the sound of the closing door, a gentle thud, sealing her fate behind us.